Detroit, Michigan. Rain slicked the parking lot outside Callahan Motors, one of the biggest auto dealerships in the state. Jack Reynolds, a tired 38-year-old single father from the east side of the city, pushed his rusted 1967 Ford Mustang toward the curb. Its old engine dead, one full headlamp cracked, the paint faded to a dull, patchy blue. He had been pushing it for 6 blocks after it stalled near the highway exit, sweat mixing with the rain on his forehead and his shirt clinging to his back. Jack worked nights as a mechanic at a small independent garage and days as a delivery driver, barely making enough to raise his 8-year-old daughter, Emily, alone since his wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness. The Mustang had been his father's car, the only thing of real value he owned, and he refused to sell it no matter how many people offered, no matter how many bills piled up on his kitchen counter. As he struggled to push the car past the dealership, the glass doors of Callahan Motors swung open. Richard Callahan, the dealership's CEO, stepped out in a tailored navy suit, phone in hand, flanked by 2 assistants who laughed at everything he said before he even finished saying it. He glanced at the smoking, sputtering Mustang and let out a short, cruel laugh that carried across the lot. "Look at this," Callahan said loudly, loud enough for the small crowd near the entrance to hear. "A grown man can't even afford to fix his own car. That thing belongs in a junkyard, not on my street." He snapped a photo on his phone, smirking as he turned it toward his assistants. "Maybe I'll put it in our lot as a before and after joke. This is what happens when you don't know anything about cars." A few onlookers chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or look away, while one older woman near the entrance shook her head and muttered that some people never learned manners, no matter how much money they made. Jack said absolutely nothing in response. He simply wiped the rain from his face, gripped the wheel tighter, and kept pushing the car past the dealership, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something other than embarrassment. It was closer to quiet, controlled fury. That night, Emily asked why his hands were shaking at dinner. Jack told her it was nothing, just a long day, and forced a smile as he served her spaghetti. But long after she fell asleep, he sat alone in the kitchen replaying Callahan's laugh over and over in his head, the words cutting deeper each time. What Callahan didn't know was that Jack wasn't just any mechanic. Before his wife's illness drained their savings and forced him to sell his own small garage, Jack Reynolds had been one of the most respected classic car restorers in the Midwest, known in enthusiast circles for his precision work on vintage Fords. He hadn't touched a serious restoration project in years, not since medical bills and single fatherhood consumed every spare hour and every spare dollar he had. That humiliation outside Callahan Motors lit something in him. He decided that night, sitting at his kitchen table with Emily asleep upstairs, that he would rebuild the Mustang himself, from the frame up, using nothing but the tools in his garage and whatever parts he could scrape together, working alone if he had to. For the next 30 days, Jack worked in his cramped garage every night after his shifts ended, often until 3 or 4 in the morning, running on coffee and stubbornness. He sourced parts from salvage yards across 3 states, rebuilt the engine block by hand, replaced the wiring system piece by piece, and restored the leather interior himself using skills he had learned from his father decades earlier in that same garage. Emily would sometimes fall asleep on a stool beside him, wrapped in a blanket, watching her father work under the dim glow of a single hanging bulb. On weekends, she handed him wrenches and sockets, calling herself his assistant mechanic, and Jack let her believe she was doing important work, because in truth, having her there kept him going on the nights his hands ached and his eyes burned from exhaustion. Neighbors began stopping by out of curiosity, drawn by the sound of the engine sputtering to life and pieces, then roaring a little louder each week as Jack tuned it closer to perfect. Word began to spread in the small local car community. A photo of Jack's oil-streaked hands working under the bare garage light was posted online by a neighbor who recognized real craftsmanship when she saw it. The post mentioned, almost as an afterthought, the story of a CEO who had mocked and photographed a struggling single father's broken-down Mustang outside his dealership. The post included Callahan's mocking quote, word for word, which someone standing nearby that day had overheard and never forgotten. The story caught fire online within 48 hours. Local news picked it up first, then a regional outlet, then a national morning show reached out to Jack's neighbor for details. Reporters wanted to know two things: who was the mechanic quietly rebuilding a legendary muscle car by hand every night after working 2 jobs to support his daughter, and who was the wealthy CEO who had laughed at him in public. On the 30th day, Jack drove the finished Mustang out of his garage for the first time. The car gleamed under the morning sun, restored to its original 1967 glory, candy apple red with chrome polished to a mirror shine, the engine roaring with a deep, throaty sound that turned heads on the street. He drove it, with Emily beside him in the passenger seat, straight to Callahan Motors. A crowd had already gathered outside, tipped off by the growing online buzz. Local news vans lined the street, cameras ready. Richard Callahan stepped outside again, this time not laughing, his face pale as he recognized the same man from a month earlier now standing beside a car that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. "You said this car belonged in a junkyard," Jack said calmly, loud enough for every camera to catch every word. "I just wanted you to see what it looks like when someone actually knows what they're doing." The crowd erupted into applause. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Someone in the back yelled that Callahan's own dealership couldn't restore a car like that if they tried for a year. Callahan stood frozen, his earlier mocking words now playing on a loop across every local news broadcast and social media feed in the city, again and again, impossible to escape. Within days, the story exploded nationally. People shared the footage of Callahan's cruel comments side by side with footage of the freshly restored Mustang, captioned with outrage over how a powerful executive had humiliated a grieving, hard-working single father in public. Callahan Motors faced a wave of backlash almost overnight. Customers canceled orders. Longtime sponsors began questioning their association with the dealership. A reputation built carefully over 20 years cracked in a single week. Meanwhile, offers poured in for Jack. A national classic car restoration company reached out, offering him a leadership position in their vintage Ford division. A television producer approached him about a show centered on garage restorations done by everyday working people. Donations came in from strangers across the country moved by his story, enough to help him pay off Emily's school fees for years to come. Jack accepted the job offer but declined most of the public spotlight, saying simply that he only wanted to give his daughter a stable, quiet life. 3 weeks after the confrontation outside the dealership, Richard Callahan issued a public apology, standing awkwardly in front of a wall of cameras, admitting his comment had been arrogant, careless, and cruel. But the damage had already been done. Callahan Motors sales dropped sharply that quarter, and within 6 months, Richard Callahan stepped down as CEO under pressure from the company's board, who cited the incident directly as a turning point in public trust. Jack Reynolds, on the other hand, opened his own small restoration shop a year later, funded partly by donations and partly by his new job support. He named it Emily's Garage, after his daughter, and hung a single photo near the entrance for every customer to see, himself pushing the broken-down Mustang through the rain, a quiet reminder of exactly where it all began. Every year on the anniversary of that rainy afternoon, Jack drove the restored Mustang through downtown Detroit with Emily in the passenger seat, tracing the same route he had once pushed the dead car along block by block. This time, The street met him with waves and honks and smiles instead of laughter and mockery. The city that had briefly watched a wealthy CEO humiliate a struggling father now remembered him instead as the man who rebuilt far more than a car. He rebuilt his own life, one bolt at a time, and reminded an entire city that quiet dignity, given enough time, will always outlast loud arrogance. Emily, older now, still sat in the passenger seat every year, grinning the same grin she wore the day they drove past Callahan Motors, and Jack still thought, every single time, that the sound of that engine was the sound of everything he had refused to give up on.